one of the things that I harp on is your process is king. The short-term results almost always are a distraction. And what you need to be able to focus on is, did I make the right decision with the information that I had at the time?
Welcome to the Disgruntled PM Podcast, your weekly therapy session for the chaotic world of project management, transforming daily frustrations into real action.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Trevor, the Disgruntled PM, joined today by my guest, Christian Stellakis. How did I pronounce that?
You nailed it. Absolutely killed it, which is actually pretty rare. I feel like in today's day and age, I get, you would be surprised the different pronunciations I get. So well done.
Well, I'll give everyone a little insider. I cheat on the system because when I do the consent and release recording, I get you to pronounce your own name.
Fair enough.
So, Christian, why don't you start off by introducing yourself to the audience and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hey everybody. My name is Christian Stellakis. I currently work as a vice president of public affairs at J Strategies Incorporated. That's a small boutique public affairs firm located up and down the Northeast. Now, when I say public affairs, people's eyes tend to glaze over a little bit. The way that I like to describe it is basically my job is talking to people in rooms for a living. I traffic in influence, basically. So I try to get people to come to my side of viewing things. And what that looks like on a day-to-day basis is I get clients in on a wide variety of issues, anything from energy to healthcare to litigation reform, and you name it. I try to figure out what messages they're trying to communicate, how best to relay that information to the people that they're trying to influence, and then I construct the strategies that allow them to succeed. And I would say the one thing that kind of differentiates me from a lot of other people working in my field is that before I was a communications consultant, I was actually a professional poker player. So I'm happy to get into that a little bit too.
Well, that's why I wanted you on, is because, we've all seen Rounders. I'm sure that's a biography of a professional poker player, right?
That's right. Yeah. In my opinion, still one of my all-time favorite poker movies.
So let's talk about poker in the realm of how it relates to the real world, because there's a lot of myths that go around about poker, and there's a lot of different things that you can learn by playing the game. And let's start with poker is a game of skill.
Yes. Poker is a game of skill. Yeah.
Care to elaborate?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people have a misconception that poker is a lot like a game like blackjack, where you're playing against the house and you go in and you try to take the casino's money. That's not exactly the case. So poker is a game of skill insofar as your goal whenever you sit at a poker table is to beat the players across from you. And so you're not actually playing against the casino at all. What you are doing is trying to construct the best strategies that allow you to exert your will and your influence over your opposition. And of course, I think where there's a lot of confusion that comes into this is that there is a good portion of luck involved. In the short term, specifically, there's a lot of things that can happen that can derail a poker session. You can get unlucky in a situation where you were very likely to win. And so there is a level of luck. And so people tend to assume, well, because there's luck involved and there's money on the line, that it's just basically gambling. But this really isn't the case. So what I was able to do as a professional poker player was sustain myself through the income that I generated from basically going to the casino, sitting at a table and playing cards for about 8 hours a day. And I did that for several years, treating it like a job, going in, clocking in my 40 hours a week, so to speak, and then coming out with enough money to be able to live off of. And so it's definitely a game of skill. You have an edge. It's just a matter of how you can maximize that and be able to ride the waves of the luck that's also inherent in the game. And that makes it a lot of fun.
See, what you just talked about right there, because for the audience, we're going to be making a lot of references probably to Rounders, because that's the most pop culture reference that I can think of that was widespread about playing poker for a living. Unless you've got a better idea, unless you've got a better suggestion.
No, I'll say that I think in terms of poker accuracy, Molly's Game, if you guys haven't seen, Aaron Sorkin, I think, wrote that. Really good in terms of just explaining what the poker ecosystem can be like sometimes. But when it comes to what it means to play poker professionally, Rounders is about as good as it gets.
Yeah, because we all, everyone sees the World Series of Poker and the high stakes games, but that's not the reality of the real world. That's an elite group, correct?
Yeah. So for me personally, I was what I would call like a mid-stakes grinder. So to break that down, what that means is I played one game, and that was No Limit Hold'em. Basically, the game that I play is you get 2 cards face down, and your goal is to make the best 5-card hand using 2 of your own cards, as well as any combination of the 5 community cards on the board. And what I did was I would show up and I would play mid-stakes games. So that means like the stakes ranging anywhere from $1, $3 to $2, $5, and then maybe $5, $10 as well if I'm feeling particularly spicy. And so, yeah, a lot of the time being a grinder is not like a glamorous thing. It's not like you're not appearing on TV or playing in these high stakes tournaments. In fact, I rarely play in tournaments at all. And I'm happy to get into why that's the case. Yeah. I found that cash games for me were just really matched my style a lot more. And the cash games allowed you to play with your own money, sit down at the table, know that the stakes are fixed, that things aren't going to change, and just allow you to execute your strategy in a repeatable process. And as long as your strategy is sound, you print.
And before we go any further, for any potential crimes you may have committed, I'm going to assume that the statute of limitations is up so you can talk about those too.
No crimes, I promise you.
Well, I meant
we're all above board here.
No illegal backdoor games that you heard about?
No. Well, here's the funny thing about that is that usually backdoor games are only illegal if the person who's hosting them rake the game, which means that they take money out of the game itself to fund the operation. But if it's just a group of like 6 guys sitting around a table and playing, there's nothing illegal about that.
Interesting. So I want to, because I'm sure the audience isn't here to just hear about poker because, we can watch movies about that and read about it, but talk about how you played the game because, the thing that got me interested in talking to you in the first place was a post you made about that. And we had a conversation offline about how I was like, there's strategy. There's a lot of things that go into that. And it's not just, we're all sitting down at a card table and what I see is what I see.
I think that there's like 3 things really that you can take from a poker player's perspective and use it in your professional life. So one of them is, I would say, it's like how to read people is really crucial. So like understanding human behaviors and what they tend to mean, being able to tell when somebody's nervous and uncomfortable or excited or anxious and kind of what motivates them. I would say that number 2 would be how to manage your emotions is like absolutely crucial and is something that really impacts your ability to play poker effectively and of course have a good career. So you need to be able to control anger and frustration because you're going to experience it a lot when you're playing poker. And then I would say the third thing that you really have to focus on when you're playing is realizing that process trumps short-term results. One of the things that poker will do is absolutely beat results-oriented thinking out of you. A lot of people have this idea, I think naturally, that their results should flow from the decisions that they make. And generally speaking, this is the case in real life. But when it comes to poker, there's so much chance that's involved in the short term that you have to force yourself to separate the decision that you make at any one given point from the result that occurs and be able to take a step back and say, was my decision sound, even though the outcome that I experienced wasn't favorable. And so all of those things really kind of play a role in your ability to be an effective poker player. And then those are the sorts of things that I found translate exceptionally well into the work that I currently do.
So there's a couple of things I want to pull on, I'll start with the most recent thing you brought up, and it reminds me of we've all been to conferences in Vegas before, and you'll go to the blackjack table, put $20 down, and you'll stare at your hand and say, what does the book say I do? So you do it, and then there's somebody 3 seats down that bucks the trend. They take they quote take the dealer's bust card, and then everyone gets mad at them because they won and everyone else lost.
Yeah, I think that's kind of funny because you see this play out a lot in poker when players have this sort of dogged adherence to what the quote unquote optimal strategy should be. Yep. And so in cards, there's a thing called game theory optimal. Now, what game theory optimal is if you think about chess and how computers have kind of mastered how to play chess. And nowadays, if you try to boot up a chess game and you go against the leading computer engine, Stockfish, that's going to eat your lunch every single time. And there's nothing that you can do about it. Doesn't matter if you're the best player in the world. He'll lose to Stockfish 100 out of 100 times. So people have tried to replicate a similar thing in poker through game theory optimal. And what GTO is essentially using a computer to run simulations that will give you readouts of here is the theoretically optimal decision to make in every situation that you find yourself in. And I think that a lot of poker pros, to their detriment, rely almost exclusively on these GTO readouts to inform their strategy. The problem with that is that once you find yourself in the weeds in a situation that there's no chart for, or that you didn't study the computer sim for, you are absolutely lost. And so one of the things that I like to focus on and when talking to people is have a process that's actually workable. And the way that you do that is you create heuristics that allow you to operate within a framework that's consistent and repeatable, while at the same time allows you to take a step back and not get too caught up and missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, because what I'm thinking of right now is, you're the pro, and you said you would go to a casino and sit down and play at a table for 8 hours, and you'd probably see, I don't know, hundreds of people come and go at that table.
Yeah.
And you're the one that's sitting in the corner that knows exactly what strategies are and how you're doing things. But inevitably somebody would come in and have no clue what they're doing. And then you'd be sitting there scratching your head going, what are you doing? Because none of this makes sense. But to them, it's just fun. And that's that adaptation piece that we talk about, even in projects, that you have to learn that just because it says this in the book doesn't mean that that's how you follow through in the real world when real people are involved and real action is involved.
I want to say that that's one of the things that really drew me to poker initially was, so it's a beautiful game and you could spend your entire life studying poker, and it's one that has infinite complexity. And so you can read every single book. You can, as I was saying, study the GTO charts until your eyes bleed. And you'll get better. You'll get a lot better. And I think that there's merit to doing that. And like knowing the math behind the decisions that you make, knowing the psychology. And then you could sit across the table from somebody that learned poker a week ago playing with their granddad or something, and who has no experience in the math behind it or any of the tells that they might be giving off or anything like that. And those people can have as much fun sitting at a table of pros than as compared to the pro himself. And I think that that's really awesome. And it's something that you don't see in a lot of other games. Like chess, for instance. Chess is one of those games where and I'm not good at all at playing chess. I like to pretend I am sometimes, but no. If I were to sit down with like a grandmaster at chess, he would beat me. And he would beat me every single time, and it would be no competition for him. But if I were, little old me were to sit down with one of the best poker players of all time, I would probably lose 7, 8 times out of 10, but I would win 2 out of those 10, 2 or 3 out of those 10 times. And that's because within the game itself, there's a level of risk and chance that's involved that kind of obscures the skill edge. It kind of creates like a fog of war, if you will. And that allows you to operate with a level of uncertainty. And so one of the things that I think really translates well into the real world is that learning poker forces you to operate with incomplete information. And that incomplete information is the same way that you live your entire life. Because basically life is a game of incomplete information. So if you can take that mentality and then bring it into your life so that you don't feel like you have to have a white knuckled grip control over every single thing that happens, you will have a much more fulfilling life, much more fulfilling career.
Man, that sounds a lot like running a project to me, is just running through incomplete information, dealing with personalities, and then there's money on the line too.
Yeah, it is. And there's so much crossover. I think about, so in poker, we have this term that's called variance. And what variance is, basically, it's the difference between the outcome that you expect to happen over the long run and the outcome that happened in the short term. And I think that that's kind of factoring variance into your everyday life is a good way to help kind of mellow you out so that you're not constantly stressing about the things that you have no control over. And when you could focus on simply your own decision making, your own process, and then taking the hands off for a little bit and saying, I know that the decision that I came to was the best that I had with the information that I had at the time, that will allow you to, just release a lot of the stress that's involved in the day in, day out, up and down fluctuations of short-term results.
That is one of my favorite things to say to people is every decision you make is the best decision at that moment with the information you have available to you. Because the moment you make a decision after that, you have more information. And we spend a lot of time looking in hindsight saying, I should have done this, I could have done that. And then you can play the butterfly effect game of how things could daisy chain together. But the reality is it's already done. You're already in the future while you're focusing on the past.
And what I'll say to that is it really does remind me of one of the biggest pots I ever played in my entire life. And it's actually one of the pots that I lost. I think that those tend to stick more with you than the ones that you win, and the ones that keep you up at night are those that you lose. And so that hand that I played, I was dealt pocket aces, which for those uninitiated is the best hand that you can have in poker before the flop. When you're dealt your 2 cards face down, if you get 2 aces, that's the best hand that you could possibly get. And your goal when you get pocket aces should be to maximize the amount of money that you can get in the pot, because it's the best hand that you could possibly have. So I was in a situation where I was dealt pocket aces and my opponent had raised the amount. So he wanted to make it more money. It comes to me and I re-raise him. So I put even more money in. And then it gets back to him. He raises again. Okay, so now the pot's getting big, and I was already playing a game that for me was a very, very large game, and it wasn't something that I was normally comfortable with. But I was like, I'm here. The game is really good. There's a lot of what we call fun players, or like not for-profit players in that game. So I thought to myself, it's a good opportunity to see what I can do. So he re-raised, and it gets back to me, and I have a decision to make. I can just call, and I can go to a flop, and I could see what the dealer puts those 3 first community cards out, and I could just take a look to see what happens. Or I could put all of my money in the middle and put everything at risk. All of my winnings from the day, just put it all in and go from there. And I thought to myself at the time, I was like, well, I have pocket aces. I'm going to go all in. I did that. He calls and he has 2 kings. Okay, now 2 kings is the second best hand that you can have. And I'm like, okay, I know from my experience that when this hand plays out, I have an 80% chance to win. So the dealer burns a card, he deals 3 cards face down, and then he puts the flop out. And the first card that I see is a king. and then the dealer proceeds to use the turn and the river, and I lose. And I sit back in my chair, and I remember watching all of those chips get pushed away from me and just feeling this like moment of existential dread. And that night, I probably reviewed that hand in my head 12 to 15 times, trying to think through. Yeah, that's it. Just trying to think through how could I have done it different so that I didn't lose. Maybe if I had just called instead of gone all in, then I could have saved the rest of my money when that king came. But then it took me a while to realize that I was trying to backfill my process by the short-term result that I had. But in reality, I didn't make any mistake by going all in with pocket aces. In fact, it was the correct decision. But what I had to realize, and I think the game changer for me, was realizing that when you put all of your money in, you have about an 80% chance to win, but that 80% chance is not 100. And so you're essentially, every time that you win, you are over-realizing your expectation, even though it doesn't feel like that. And when you win, it feels like it's just owed to you because you were supposed to win because you're the favorite.
And let me throw something else out there just hearing this story too, and reality of how we do things. You are never going to win that hand no matter what, based off of the cards that came out. And we look at situations all the time of, well, if I had done this differently or that differently, and you try and change the circumstances. But the reality is that that hand was dealt for you to lose no matter how you bet on it, no matter what, because the cards weren't going to change. It was just how the betting procedures were done.
Exactly. One of the ways to think about it is that unbeknownst to all the players at the table, the deck is stacked in a certain way so that every player and every individual hand has a certain like expected value that they're going to either win or lose that hand. And so my expected value for that hand was minus a lot of money. And it doesn't really make a difference whether or not like I played it differently to try to minimize my losses. Because if I'm trying to do that, then I'm trying to solve for the wrong problem. You should be, in every individual instance that you have, trying to maximize your expected value. And so all that you can do before you know the result is make the best decision that you can with the information that you have at the time. And so for me, the best decision was to go all in, knowing that over the long run, in that individual circumstance, I'm going to win 80% of the time. Now, that 80% is not 100%. And sometimes, like that individual time, I had to give back the 20%. And with it, the rest of my chips. But over the long run, those short-term results don't dictate the quality of your decision. What dictates the quality of your decision is your process. And so one of the things that I like to do when I talk to like my clients, for instance, is tell them, think about your short-term results as like the waves of an ocean, right? You should be trying to get from point A to point B through those waves. And the way that you should think about it is you are a cruise ship and not a speedboat, right? So you feel the waves under you as you go. And if the water gets really choppy, hey, maybe it's time to take a step back and reevaluate. But any one individual wave should not capsize you.
Yeah, what I was just thinking when you were telling that is thinking about a surfer, how when they see a wave that they're not going to take, they dive under it. And some waves you can dive under, pop back up super easy. Some are harder than others, and some you're just going to eat it no matter what. You just try and mitigate the damage. And we've been talking a lot about poker, but I hope that everyone sees the through lines of what we're talking about here to the real world and not just projects, but everything, because we make decisions, we do these things all day long. And when you really stand back and look at things, sometimes deconstruct it, lessons learned, after action reviews, whatever your choice of terms is, when you look back and look at it from a outside perspective that you weren't personally involved, a lot of the times you'll come to that conclusion that was going to happen no matter what decision I made. I just may have mitigated 10% less bad to come to me, or I may have helped it, but either way, a lot of the decisions we make in life, there are outside factors that control more than what we decide.
Yeah. I think that when we're talking about careers and jobs, I would say that organizations routinely confuse outcomes with decision quality. And it makes sense. You want to do an after action report. You want to look at the results to see what worked and what didn't, right? I think that the problem is a lot of the time is that the window that people are looking at to determine whether or not a process was successful is far too limited. So your sample size is just too small.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I always joke with my wife that someone will ask me something and I'm like, I'm an N of 1. and then if they don't get the statistical joke, they're lost. But if they do get it, they do exactly what you did. They laugh at it because they understand that you're taking a sample size of 1 and comparing it to and extrapolating that to who knows what you're doing in your mind, rather than just looking at it as it's a sample size of 1.
Yeah. And I think that, for me, what you can experience in poker, which can really kind of shape your life and the way that you think about things, is I want to say that poker is one of those unique situations where you can go to work really hard for the day, make all of the decisions correctly, and then leave with less money than you started. And that can be really jarring for a lot of people, because it goes against literally our entire way that our brains are, how they function. Like, our brains are designed to connect like decision and result. And then if there's a positive result, you get a dopamine hit. And if there's a negative result, you feel bad about yourself and you want to change. What poker really forces you to do is, to the best of your ability, abandon that mentality, because you're going to drive yourself insane if you judge the quality of your play by the results of any one individual session. And sometimes it's not even one session. I've known poker players that have gone months and months and months of making consistently good decisions and being punished for it. And it's not just like one hand. You can make a decision in one hand and get punished for it. And the mentality that you have to have going into the next one is, I know, based on the math, based on the psychology behind it, based on the game theory that I've studied, I know that this is the best decision. So when that situation comes up again, even though I was just punished for it, I would and I will make the same decision again. And that can be very difficult for a lot of people to accept.
So let's pause here for a moment, because this is the part where I want to talk about the Patreon that I have to help for listeners that want to support the show. And that's for $5 a month. You get access to the postmortem interviews. Christian's going to be joining us later with those. And we're going to be talking about strategic restraint, meaning knowing when to speak, respond, or escalate things, and also ways to handle a crisis while remaining calm. Because I think he's got a little bit of experience in those topics. And, that's the $5 a month helps support the show, helps pay for all the expenses to put this out there and do everything that I do. And I also want to say that I appreciate all the current Patreon subscribers for everything that they're doing to help support me and the show. But to get back to Christian now, let's talk a little bit about incentives, because we've talked a lot about process and game theory and a lot of different things. But in life, in poker and everything, there's always an incentive. And how do you work through when you're playing poker? You're obviously playing for money, but I'm going to assume that when it's your job, you're not looking at it as dollars and cents like I would if I'm in Vegas for a weekend, throwing $20 on the table.
Yeah, I would say that, you really, as a professional, the goal is to divorce money from the decision making as much as possible. So if you find yourself in a spot where you know the best decision and what it should be, but you find that you're scared of losing a certain amount of money or thinking about what the implications of that loss would be on your ability to, let's say, like pay rent or make ends meet, then the general thought process is that you are playing beyond the stakes that you should, and that you should move down. And I think that that's kind of a through line throughout poker, is trying to understand, okay, what is the level of comfort that different people have with the money that they're playing for, and to what level of attachment do they have to it. So talking about incentives, I think one of the things that I've found most interesting is I've studied like human psychology, is there's this phenomenon that basically losing feels worse than winning feels good. Okay. And so they've run studies on this from like sociological studies that have found that having a person lose $100, first of all, you remember that a lot more than you do winning $100. And it also comparably feels a lot more painful. And so that kind of colors the decision making that I have when I'm in a situation and I'm seeking to influence people. You kind of have to realize that for the most part, despite our desire to be rational human beings to the best of our ability and to make what we consider to be logical decisions, people are creatures of habit. They're emotional creatures. And they don't always respond in purely logical ways, or the ways that like economists would theorize or model them to do. And so you have to take that into account whenever you're working with anybody. You cannot assume that they're going to be rational actors. What you need to figure out is what motivates them, and to what degree can you present things to them that will either be enticing to them or negative outcomes that they want to avoid. And then you can start to develop your strategy around that. So I guess all of this to say is you should absolutely and always consider your audience as the primary factor that's determining how you should approach a problem and the solution that you should propose to it.
Well, one of the things you hit on is something that I work on with my kids. My wife and I will take them and we'll go yard sailing, or we'll go to the different stores, and they'll look at, they have money that we set aside for them in the bank accounts that's digital money, so to speak. And then they have their piggy banks. And if they say they want to buy something, I physically tell them, you need to hand the cash over to me. You need to physically hand the money over when we get home. Or if it's planned out, I make them hand the money to the cashier, because to your point about the idea, that psychology, I want them to physically hand the money out and see it leaving their possession. Because how do we get into credit card debt? Same way, you just swipe along the way and you get what you need, and you don't even have to leave the house now. So yeah. I try to impart that, and then you start working on projects and things like that, and you start saying, "Oh, it's only X amount of money." When you talk about thousands, it's only 100. Talk about hundreds of thousands, it's only a couple thousand. Talk about millions of dollars, your rounding errors are hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. We lose track of the scale of what we're talking about, because it's all relative to the amount of money that, especially with money. But when you talk about scale and scope, it's how much money are you working with? And then the rounding errors, the more you have, the rounding errors become bigger.
It's really easy to depersonalize the money when you don't see it. Essentially, I think that the concept that psychologists talk about is what's called friction. And when there is basically a very little amount of obstacles that are separating
Mm-hmm.
you from making a decision, it becomes so much easier to actually have that decision play out. And so, because human beings are creatures of habit, and a lot of the times we just want to minimize the cognitive load that's involved in the choices that we make. And so we'll default to, easy decisions because we don't have to think. And that actually plays out in a lot of like public policy things as well. So, for instance, they say that one of the best ways to get a substantial increase in the number of folks that are on the donor organ registry list
Yep.
is simply just to change it from an opt-in to an
Opt-in to
opt-in to an opt-out. Exactly.
Yep.
And all you have to do is check a box that says, I want to opt out, right? But so few people actually take the time to do that little bit of friction substantially alters the outcome of the number of donors that are on the registry. So it's kind of like having that mentality of like, these are the things that influence people. What is that the person cares about? How much effort are they willing to put into it? And then you can kind of start to construct your strategy around that.
Well, what's funny is I just recently, probably in the last 2 weeks, made a post about how when I was in the military, my team had a policy of, if you're not here to defend yourself, it's your fault. And we designed this around our leaders. When a problem came up, they looked for someone to yell at first. So the rule, we developed this rule amongst all of us was, if you're not here, we all point the finger to that person. So he calls that person, yells at that person, and the person that he's yelling at is like, I haven't been in the office all day. I've been out doing XYZ, whatever. And what that did was that gave the team time to actually get the work, to figure out what they were yelling about, solve the problem, and be left alone. And half of my comments were talking about toxic leadership culture and all this. And I even wrote in the post that this wasn't about leadership. This was about working within the friction of the system that was in place, because we weren't going to change the way the leaders yelled. We weren't going to change that because that goes into military culture and a lot of other things. But we weren't going to change the constraints we were living in. We had to work around them to figure out, how do we stop the person that's in the office that can affect the change of whatever the problem is from getting yelled at for 45 minutes instead of actually doing meaningful work?
Yeah, I think it's funny. What a good thing to realize is that, yes, you always have to kind of operate in the bounds of the situation that you're given, right? And I think that exactly. And so a lot of the decisions that you make, let's say, in my case, at a poker table, right? You're making decisions, and I think a lot of people try, as I was saying before, to find the optimal decision. And I used to do this as well. I would do this all the time. So, for instance, I would read and study, and I would learn that one of the best bluffing hands that you can have is this hand that's ace and a 5, and it's suited. So you get ace 5 suited. And the reason that it's the best, there's a whole bunch of like nerdy statistical reasons why that's the case. But the gist of it is that in theory world, you should always bluff with this hand. Well, maybe not always, but almost always bluff with this hand.
Define what bluff means for the audience that doesn't know poker.
Sure. So bluffing essentially is pretending that you have a hand that you don't have. So with a hand like ace 5, because you have an ace in your hand, it makes it less likely that your opponents have 2 aces in their hand. And so because of that fact, it's a good hand to pretend with, because it's less likely that your opponents are going to have a very, very strong hand to be able to fight against you. So what I would find... go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you're also using the statistical analysis that 25% of the aces are in your hand. So doing the math, I'm sure there's a whole algorithm that you can use, but you can extrapolate that out of a 52 card deck, 25% of the aces are in front of you. That means 75% could be in the deck, could be in the cards, in the community cards, in the other players' hands, and then strategizing around that is probably where you're going, right?
Exactly. So what would happen is I would have it in my mind that, oh, okay, I need to bluff with this hand. And then what we would run up against is a player um, who fits the personality type as somebody that plays very few hands. That whenever he raises, almost always has a very strong hand. And so I would find myself in a situation playing against somebody like this, where I would be trying to bluff with a theoretically optimal hand, and then he would just show up anyway with a really good hand, and I would lose as a result of that. And what you have to realize is that everything is context dependent, and it depends on the person that you're playing against and playing with. And you need to be able to adjust your strategy to account for that. It's kind of like, imagine if, and this might be helpful, like imagine that you're playing rock, paper, scissors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the theoretically optimal way to play rock, paper, scissors is that you throw rock, you throw paper, and that you throw scissors 33% of the time. And that you randomize so nobody can get an advantage over you. But if we have like Bobby over here, who's a real man's man, and he believes in being strong and being authoritative, and he's going to throw rock because he thinks rock is just the superior play. And maybe every once in a while he'll throw in scissors just to change it up, but he's throwing rock 85% of the time. Your goal should not be to randomize against Bobby. Your goal should be to throw paper, because paper is going to win a vast, like almost always against this guy. So all of that to say, you need to factor in who the person that you're playing against, their tendencies, and the structure that they're operating within, their paradigm, to be able to really get the most out of your strategy.
And then that can take us into the hustler thing of Bobby is sitting there being dumb, playing rock every time to watch your patterns to see how you behave, and then start throwing out scissors until you adapt to his strategy.
And then so on and so forth, right? And ultimately, eventually, after thousands and thousands and thousands of games of rock, paper, scissors, you end up in a situation where each of you are randomizing and throwing rock, paper, scissors 33% of the time. But over the short run, if your goal is to make the best decision against Bobby with the information that you have, you know that you need to throw paper because he's throwing rock because he's strong. And and yeah, eventually things will kind of even out. And that's what game theory optimal tries to get to, is the long-term results of things. But a lot of the time when you're playing poker, the folks that you're playing against, you might see them for one session and then you might never see them again. So you really kind of need to make broad general assumptions about the way that they're playing, the strategies that they're using, and then figuring out how best to counter those exploitatively rather than game theory optimal. And like the way that I like to say it is theory and practice are the same in theory but not in practice.
So for somebody who built systems around, we'll say, making your living, what would make you decide to break your system as you're watching a game unfold? Because we all build processes for a living and do these types of things. And then you look at the system, you look at the decision point, and it's like, well, this is what my process says over here, but logic would dictate in this situation, I need to go absolutely the other way of my process.
And I think this is really where it helps to have heuristics. So rules of thumb that guide your general decision making, but allow you substantial flexibility to be able to improvise as you see things unfold. And so when I sit down at a poker table, or like when I enter like a boardroom or whatever, one of the things I'm immediately looking for is to be able to categorize the types of people that I'm looking at. So it's easy to explain from a poker perspective. You can quickly identify how a player plays by really only seeing a few hands that they play the way that they play, their level of comfortability while playing, and even things like how they stack their chips, how they sit at a table. All of that will kind of help determine what's the quality, what's the caliber of the individual that I'm playing against. And so for players that are maybe a little bit more inexperienced, I will default to these general heuristics because I know that they performed very well against players with less experience. But with players that are much more advanced, I might have to get into the higher theoretical concepts to be able to combat them. So you really just have to be observant to see the people and like how they are behaving at the table, like what are the inclinations that they have. And then from that, you can choose whether or not you want to deviate.
Yeah, and I think that we've spoken a lot about poker specifically, but I hope the audience gleams that this is not just a conversation about cards. That these are all of the things we're talking about are related to how do you sit in a meeting room? How do you interact with stakeholders, peers, executives, all those different types of things, because everyone's got their tells, everyone's got their motivations, and you've got to know how to work with those rather than against them.
Yeah. And I would say that like, I think that people have like a general fear of taking a look at like a single event. Let's say that your boss like doesn't respond immediately to your email that you send for a proposal, right? I think people have this fear of like, oh no, she hates it because she didn't respond really quickly. And the way that you should be thinking about that is not necessarily this one single factor analysis of she didn't respond, but kind of take a zoomed out perspective and think about it like, oh, okay, well, maybe she's busy, or maybe she's dealing with other competing stakeholders that are pushing back, maybe like legal raised something or finance objected or whatever. So there's all of these factors that could influence why things are playing out the way that they are playing out. And I think what our job is being able to take those confluence of events, taking a step back and realizing, okay, despite the fact that it didn't go immediately as I wanted it to go, or things haven't exactly gone to plan, does that mean that I did something wrong? Or does that mean that there are factors that are beyond my control that are influencing how things play out? And so being able to separate that, I think, is a skill that extends far beyond poker and gets into like people's daily lives.
Well, I'll take that scenario one step further. And that is, did you send your boss a 14-page proposal or a 1-page proposal? Did you send it to them when you knew that they might be traveling and they've been on a plane for 8 hours, right when 8 hours after you sent it to them, so they had no chance to even see it? Or even more relevant is, are they the type of leader that will drop everything to look at the proposal you send it when they send it? Or are they the person that typically takes 2 to 3 days, because going back to behaviors and patterns, that's something that you need to know about as your stakeholders. So you should, doing all of these split second calculations in your head are not things that are instant, but they become that way over time as you model your behavior.
That's right. And I think that's exactly why you need to have like these rules of thumb that you can kind of fall back on time and time again, that are reliable, consistent, repeatable, and that generally speaking point you in the right direction, so that you're not course correcting constantly based on factors that you don't have 100% insight into. And so that's one of the things that I harp on is your process is king. The short-term results almost always are a distraction. And what you need to be able to focus on is, did I make the right decision with the information that I had at the time? And I think a good way to think about it is this, right? So think about the stock market, right? On any individual day of the stock market, things might go up, things might go down. And to us, it can kind of seem really random. But because the processes within the stock market is sound, if you look at the Dow Jones and you zoom out, maybe a year, maybe 5 years, maybe 15 years, what you see is a general trend upwards. And that's because despite those individual fluctuations in the day-to-day results, the institutional processes that are underlying the Dow are absolutely sound. And so you get the results that come despite the fact that you might have stretches where it goes down and goes down and it goes down. But we know that you zoom out far enough and things turn for the better.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Warren Buffett when he was asked how much he lost during the economic downturn in the stock market crash from the early 2000s. And his answer was zero. Mm-hmm. Because he never sold anything. He just held on to it and knew that it would course correct over time. And the blips on the radar is where you get caught, kind of, because you're looking at things short-sighted and not long-term, because it's a long-term play. And we can wrap this up kind of going back to Rounders, because towards the end of the movie, Matt Damon's character was like, I got beat. I didn't have a bad rap. I didn't, in the very beginning when he loses all of his money, he's sitting there saying, he's like, I didn't mess up. I was right. It didn't work that time. Yeah. And then at the end, you see him come full circle and win all of his money back. But it was just the point that he acknowledged he was right in what he did, but he had a bad outcome. And that happens in life more often than we want to admit, because we look for the boogeyman instead of the reality.
Exactly. I would say this. I would say that don't be afraid of losing. Don't be afraid of putting yourself out there, risking an outcome and having things go wrong. In poker, you have to get really comfortable with kind of making a fool of yourself from time to time. Sometimes you bluff in a spot that you know is a good place to bluff. You pretend like you have a really good hand, and your opponent just also has a really good hand, and he beats you into the pot, and he turns over his hand really quickly and, triumphantly stares at you. And you have to kind of sheepishly fold your hand and pretend like that didn't happen. That's okay when that happens. It's okay. We have this saying, which is, in poker, sometimes in stories, the hero dies. Yep. And it's not the end of the world if you play a hand and you take a risk and it blows up in your face. There's always going to be another hand. And so I heard recently, I forget who said this, but they said embarrassment is an underexplored emotion. Go out there and make a fool of yourself.
Well,
and
I was going to say, I think back to, there was once upon a time when if you wanted to talk to a girl, you had to call her house line, hope you did not get the dad or the brother or anybody else. And then when you did, you had to talk to them and say, is so-and-so home? And then, yes, I'm this person. You had to go through a mini interrogation just to get to the person you wanted to before you even got the guts up to ask her out or do anything like that.
Right.
And that was a character building thing. Like that was a gut check every single time you picked up that phone. And now a lot of that skill is lost in a way, but we've got to find it somewhere else.
Yeah. I would say that if your success rate is like 100% on things, then you aren't putting yourself out there nearly enough. Yeah. I think that you could succeed in so many more ventures than you're willing yourself to take a risk on. If you are constantly succeeding in something, it means that you aren't risking and you're not growing as a result. So yeah, you don't be afraid to put yourself out there. Sometimes you look silly, but you grow from that and you realize that you're not the main character. Most people are not that concerned about you looking silly. You are by far the biggest critic of yourself. A lot of people are too concerned about what, the cards that they're looking at to really care that you just bluffed all of your money away. And they're just thinking about the next hand.
Well, and to wrap this up with an actual real story is West Point, the military academy, is famous for they only accept the best of the best in the country, right? Well, everybody going into that class freshman year is the best of the best. So one of the exercises that they do throughout your freshman year is everybody will fail at something because nobody can be the best at everything. Some people are really great runners, but terrible swimmers. And some people are great wrestlers, but terrible runners. And the cadre watch how you fail and how you come back from that failure, because a lot of those kids have never failed in their lives. To get into West Point, it takes a lot. It takes a lot of discipline and everything else. And odds are they've never had that adversity handed to them on a silver platter of failure, and they got to just deal with it. They can't avoid it.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story of like when I started out playing cards, I had this mentality that, well, because I put the effort in, I work harder than everybody else, I study more, that like I deserve to win, right? And so I would go and play against people who had no idea what they were doing, respectfully, and they would beat me. And sometimes they would beat me bad. And I would get so frustrated with that outcome because I would have, in the poker community, we call this entitlement tilt. Mm-hmm. And what tilt is just basically you're becoming emotionally compromised so that your emotions are dictating your decisions rather than your process dictating your decisions. So I would get so frustrated and so angry because, well, these guys, they don't know what I know about the game. They don't think in the high level strategy that I do. And yet they're beating me and I'm going home empty handed.
But you have your knowledge.
Exactly. Yes. I have my knowledge. And so that was my shield that I would cloak myself in. It's like, I know that I'm a better player, yada, 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 all this nonsense. What you have to realize is a few things. What you have to realize is that the cards don't care if you study 6 hours a day or play 40 hours a week. It doesn't matter to the cards. What the cards do is they just distribute risk and they provide expected value. And sometimes that's going to mean that you're going to overrealize, and sometimes that's going to mean that you're going to lose and lose consistently. And the worst downswing that I ever had.
Well, we'll get to that. Okay.
All right. That sounds good. But yeah, all of that to say, realizing and having a mentality of saying to yourself, it's okay. And being thankful for what you are able to accomplish, even when things are going bad for you, is a good perspective to have.
So with that, I think we're about ready to wrap up, and every guest gets a personalized question. So yours is going to be fairly simple, if you're willing to share it. What's the most you've won and the most you've lost in a single day playing poker?
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So this almost kind of skews it a little bit because I played a tournament, and it's funny because we talked about how I usually don't play tournaments, but when I did play a tournament, I actually ended up winning that tournament. I think I won that single day tournament for about 16,000 or something like that. So it was a pretty good single day tournament victory. My biggest loss, I would say, is on any individual day was a cash game day. And it was probably in the ballpark of like 35 to 4,000.
Okay. So, I mean, but to give the audience
4K rather.
Yeah. But to give the audience perspective, that's those swings that we talk about.
Exactly. It is like you can show up and you can think that you're going to have a great day and that you're all prepared and you're ready to go. And then I've had situations where I've sat down, literally the first hand that I played, I lost my entire stack. And so you really kind of have to recalibrate and realize that everything's going to be all right.
So with that, I think that's a great place for us to wrap. So why don't you tell the audience where they can find you, what you're up to, all that great stuff?
Yeah. So you can find me at my personal website at christianstellakis.com. Check out the organization that I work for, J Strategies Incorporated, at jstrategiesincorporated.com. And follow me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/Christian-Stellakis.
I'll have links to all that in the show notes. So with that, I want to thank the Patreon subscribers who helped fund the show. Most importantly, I want to thank every listener out there who's downloading the show and consuming it and hopefully learning something from it. And remember, people, please like, subscribe, follow all that fun stuff on the social media algorithms. I don't know how it all works, but it's supposed to help more people help the show get better reach to more people, to get the show out there, to get this great information and these great guests information out there. So let's not forget all that stuff. And it's the best value in town because it costs you nothing. So with that, let's end like we always do. May all your deliverables be on time, your budget's in the black, and your scope not creeping. For Christian Stellakis, I'm still Trevor, and I'm still the disgruntled PM. Thanks for listening.